you today about text, time, and interpretation. Because as an artist and a teacher, I'm equally fascinated and challenged by these aspects of music. And the challenge comes from my own work. It also comes from teaching practice. When I work with young artists and we constantly talk about what the text says and how to play it, and then I hear many times sentences like, well, I feel like this, or I think it should be like this. And there's a lot of talk about this is my interpretation. And somehow whenever I hear this phrase, I suppose I should get excited, but actually a lot of alarm bells start ringing in my head. And I immediately get worried about this. So I thought, why am I worrying about this? And I have come to the conclusion that actually there is an underlying issue between these three things, sort of time, text, and interpretation, is what is subjective and what is objective. And when it is subjective, how much or how little it can be. And I started thinking about these questions. And one thing is actually text, because as actors, as film directors, we work with musical text, which is notation, organization of pitch with rhythm. This is what we read. And in singers' cases, also the words that come into this. We have other things that are written in the score, such as articulation, such as dynamics, or if they're not written, we have to do research and find out how these things were performed in those times, and what are the traditions that existed a long time ago. And basically write these things on a piece of paper or compare various sources and so on. But basically that's what text is. And of course text of music is not music itself, because music can only exist in sound. So Wagner's opera in a book is not Wagner's opera. Wagner's opera is when we hear it, when we can associate this with sound, I think. And of course the sound by itself is organized in time. So text is a pathway to music. And I think text doesn't really tolerate any infidelity. I think there is no room for interpretation. You probably feel quite shocked by it, but this is my opinion. And I think, for example, I think you can't really interpret sonata by Beethoven. You have to, in a sense, follow instructions. At least to start with, what is on a piece of paper. And you have to do more than that, than just to follow instructions. You have to analyze it. You have to kind of deconstruct the piece. You have to research. You have to compare early style of a composer with the later style and see how it's developed. You have to compare, I think, works of composers from the same era and see how is the language different or the same. But initially what you have is a piece of paper with many instructions. But I also find that very often when the process goes a little bit further than just reading the notes, actually we forget to give the text enough attention. And things like where it says crescendo, where it says diminuendo, or what exactly articulation is there. Here somehow gets lost because we start thinking about the sound and we start thinking about our own interpretation, and we actually forget that there are a lot of information still in the text that we have somehow overlooked. So I think text is something that is quite rigid in a way. Then I started thinking actually that what then happens, once we go over this, and sometimes we lose a perspective exactly of what we're looking in the text, and sometimes articulation suffers and we create our own dynamics out of it. But I think the most kind of sometimes murderous act is performed with the rhythm. What people do with time. And I think time is probably the most precious thing in life. This is the most precious thing in life. What we have is time, and because time is a sort of music explores every aspect of human life. It explores human emotion, and it explores the human imagination, and it talks about soul. So in the context of text, I think time can be both a very concrete thing, because we see the rhythm written down, and yet I think it can be most elusive thing at the same time, because even if you look at, for example, time signature, this is something that most people know what they sing in or play, but they don't always think how to relate rhythmical figures that they're doing to the pulse they're in. And yet that information is there, but somehow it's easy to overlook this. So when we talk about time, I think we start with things like rhythmical accuracy, because if your rhythm is not accurate, then you are generally lacking clarity. And this goes for all instruments, and voice included. Because if your rhythm is not accurate, your overall general timing is a little bit loose. So we need to, I think, strive to develop this rhythmical fluency, to be able to play kind of different rhythms accurately. I mean, I'm sure you know how many times when you encounter dotted rhythms and the variety of mistakes that can occur very naturally, like replacing, I don't know, dotted quaver, the semi-quaver with a triplet rhythm, for example, and not noticing it. And then you can go further, like into sort of say Baroque areas, for example, or slow movements of sonatas, of classical sonatas, where rhythm is subdivided to such small units of time, and it's very easy to approximate it, but not do it absolutely precisely. Or then it goes further, like when you have to perform to a certain pulse, say quavers, and then it changes to triplets, and then it changes to semi-quavers. In majority of cases, it's very difficult to keep the pulse even throughout. So I think it's something that I think once people kind of pass music school, they stop thinking about it. They actually, we still need to work on developing that rhythmical accuracy and ability to play different rhythms to a certain pulse without having to change the pulse. And this could be done in a variety of ways. Even when you, Nikolai was talking about warming up, for example, when you warm up before your practice, you play scales, but you can also play these scales with a certain beat and try different rhythms in these scales, and try changing from quavers to triplets and to semi-quavers without slowing down, without stopping, without changing the pulse. And it's actually not that easy. But if you can, I think, incorporate that in your practice, this kind of rhythmical variations, I think that's would be really, really useful. And the other thing is, you can do the same actually with and try to achieve kind of dynamic fluency, so that again it's something that will connect to the text and make you a little bit aware of what you're doing. For example, when you perform a scale, you can set certain changes, plan certain changes of dynamics throughout, and execute it without changing the pulse. And the same goes with, I think, with tempo. You know, to be ability to play from very slow to very fast. Of course, judging by what you can do physically is really quite important. An interesting issue comes up all the time about people practicing with metronome. And this is, at some point, I think, you know, some people can't live without it, and some people ignore it completely. They think it's the most unmusical thing you can do. And I'm sure you will ask many people around, and you will find that everybody has a different opinion about this. But, and of course, there is some problem that can occur whilst you're practicing with metronome. You can get to the point where you completely rely on the beat given by the metronome. I'm sure you know that so many people, or yourself included, sometimes when we forget that there is this kind of addiction that can happen, and you start relying on metronome, you realize and saying, well, actually I can play at home with metronome really well, or sing with metronome, absolutely keep the pulse, but once the metronome switched off, I can't do it. And this is a kind of very real problem for many of us that perhaps practice in a slightly wrong way, because metronome, of course, is a tool to indicate of where you're off. Yeah, but it's not the tool to improve necessarily your inner sense of pulse. This has to be done kind of as a help. So, for example, when you're working with metronome, what you can do is to still be engaged with music, because I often find when people put that device on, they forget they have to still create phrases, they still have to use dynamics. They still have to think about musicality of the piece they're playing, and it sort of becomes much more robotic in the sense, you know, just kind of I'm playing or singing my notes, and this is the ticking of metronome, and I kind of roughly where I am. But I think it's very important to be very musical when you do that, because if you think about it, when we experience a feeling, or we think about a piece of music that has either sadness in it, or joy, or excitement, our body reacts to it in a very different way. So if we practice without thinking about emotions, actually the physical state, the actual physique of a person is very different. The muscles exist in a very different state. And when you practice with those emotions, of thinking about what you want to say, the tone of your muscles is actually quite different. And if you haven't practiced keeping that within a pulse, it can go, because you often find that you prepare the piece well, and then the teacher starts asking you for expression, or teacher starts asking you for dynamics or extension or character. You often find that the first thing goes is that sense of pulse, of knowing where you are. So that, I think, is one of the most kind of challenging aspects of time. You know, this kind of connection of many things together. One is rhythm, and then, of course, the dynamics, and then your expressive state. You know, what you're trying to do, and doing that in time. I mean, many times, one of the most kind of, let's say, gray areas are rubato. For example, with rubato, often when people start thinking about a particular emotion that overcomes them, and they say, okay, well, I want to play it slower at this point. Sometimes the music comes to a halt. And the reason this happens is because they forget actually that there still must be a heartbeat. That heartbeat is the one that slows down. And of course then you can think about many conductors who use different techniques in slowing down. Like if they would conduct by, say, beats, crotchet beats, they can go to quaver beats to slow you down. So you've got to kind of try to incorporate it. I mean, today in my lesson we were talking with one of the students about how to slow down, and I've asked you to count. And when you count, you then actually, you don't get engaged with the piano. There's so too many things we're doing, but when you actually count and then you feel the time stopping, then you can experience a little bit the space that you want, the space that feels natural within the pulse. And so I think this, for me, is the most kind of challenging aspect of being a musician. And I've heard, you know, of course, in many singing situations as well, it's the situation where, especially because you have words and you have to pronounce certain, and often in foreign languages, pronounce certain syllables together, and you've got to keep that rhythm tight. And often there's been a lot of compromises. I don't know if I'm saying the right thing, Susan, but you know, there's been a lot of compromises with trying to say the word and forgetting that actually it's got to be in that rhythmical formula. So, you know, I think developing that rhythmical fluency would be really something that can support your study a lot, and you can do that as a sort of warm-up and independently from a piece. And also addressing things like changing rhythmical groups, also in your practice, going from, you know, semiquavers to triplets to semiquavers and back, and changing that, but, you know, within that pulse. I think that would be also very good. And I think actually talking about interpretation, whenever you talk to people, majority of people about interpretation, actually most of it is concerned with speed. They will say, well, so-and-so plays it much faster, or so-and-so plays it very slowly, or so-and-so takes this section. Actually, if you think about it, it doesn't really make much sense, because when you look at a piece of music, you build your own picture, and you analyze and structure this work of music within the puzzle, within the space that you feel it. So I think, you know, in that point, it is your individual work. I suppose we can call that interpretive work to an extent, because you are finding your own pace within that piece of music. But as far as you know, rhythm is concerned, as far as relationship of rhythm and pulse are concerned, I really would encourage you to be much more precise and much more clear and exact, because there's so much work that you can do independently before you walk into a classroom and play something or sing something to your teacher. Just simply because you can study the text better and develop that sort of rhythmical fluency and dynamic fluency, and respect what is written, because it's not forgiven. The text is there to be delivered, essentially.